Hey everyone, I'm back again with another record pickup video. Forgive me that it's been so long since the last installment of the series. Things have been super hectic with work, school, and my personal life that I haven't had too much time to dedicate to not only purchasing many records, but also listening to them as well. I'm also reworking the series into numbered installments rather than a monthly format due to how spread out each part of the series is going to be. The first pickup I'm going to show you guys dates back all the way to June of 2021 to show you how much I've been slacking on the series. All that aside, I promise I won't ramble on too much longer, and let's take a look at what I've picked up since the last time. The first record I have to show you guys is the Fugees' second and final album, The Score. I feel like this album doesn't need much introduction. It is one of the most critically acclaimed hip-hop albums of all time. The Fugees consist of an all-star lineup of Pras Michel, Lauryn Hill, and Wyclef Jean after all. I am excited to add this one to my collection. It is one of my favorite 90s hip-hop albums and sounds amazing on my sound system. I had this one to my collection way back in June of 2021. It's been a slow year for my collection. This is actually a gift from my sister. Not entirely sure what I did to earn this or how she knew I liked the Fugees, but I'm grateful regardless. As I've mentioned in the previous record pickup video, I made a childhood promise to myself to get every Rush album on CD, and have since then been trying to keep that promise ever since. But that doesn't mean I can't double dip and get some of their albums on vinyl as well. This is their third album, Chorus of Steel, often considered to be the black sheep of their discography for being a little too prog. The album has grown on me over the years, with their more radio-friendly songs in the album Bastille Day and I Think I'm Going Bald being some of my favorites. I think this album is a little underappreciated, but there's probably a little bias in that statement. The next album I picked up brings up heavy memories of high school when I was deep into my 80s pop phase. This is Bruce Springsteen's Born in the USA. There are so many classics on this album, such as the title track, Dancing in the Dark, No Surrender, Cover Me, and more. I'm not a major Bruce Springsteen fan, but this album and Born to Run are an exception. Really excited to add this one to my collection. Next up, I added two Billy Joel albums to my collection. Those are An Innocent Man and The Bridge. An Innocent Man in particular brings up many high school memories as well. I remember the track Uptown Girl being an ongoing reference between me and my friends. Christy Lee and The Longest Time are also amazing songs off this album. The Bridge has such beautiful album artwork. The Bridge also features many new wave influences, which I think meshes well with Billy's voice. Running on Ice and Code of Silence, the latter of which features an amazing feature from Cyndi Lauper, are by far my favorites off the album. Billy Joel has such an interesting catalog. I really do hope to add more of his albums to my collection. The man really never missed and didn't overstay his welcome either. I honestly didn't know what to expect from this next album. This is Archangel's self-titled debut album. Archangel consists of the duo of Jeff Kanata and Michael Solden, as well as various session musicians. It is a pretty impressive album for only being created by two people with solid production. From what I've read online, the idea is that this album was never intended to be performed live, since there wasn't an actual band, and was instead meant to be an Alan Parsons Project sort of scenario. The album features many radio-oriented 80s rock tracks. It is a decent album, but I'm not sure if I'll go back to it in the near future. There weren't any tracks that really stuck with me after listening. This album is surprisingly on Spotify if you'd like to check it out. Cat Stevens is an artist I've always revered. Unaware of how popular his music was, his album Where Do the Children Play was one of the first records I've ever purchased. However, this time I recently added his 1975 album Numbers, A Pythagorean Theory Tale to my collection. This album is often considered to be the black sheep of his discography because it's a concept album about math. For those who don't know, Cat Stevens isn't the kind of artist who's attempted a concept album before and hasn't since. The album was an enjoyable listen and one that I'll have to listen to a couple times before I make an opinion on it. Until then, I can't help but admire the packaging. The way how they went about the alternate album covers is an interesting touch. The album also came with a storybook illustrated by Stevens himself that details the album's concept. For only $3, I'm excited to add this one to my collection and hopefully it'll grow on me with more listens. Next up, I added Love Beach by Emerson, Lake and Palmer to my collection. This album has always been pretty hilariously infamous in my mind because not only is it the album that initially broke up the band, but it's also a product of the band's tax evasion. Just by looking at the cover alone, it's a drastic departure from the band's typical prog heavy material and has more of a traditional 70s radio rock feel. It's been a while since I've revisited this one, but I felt that Taste of Your Love and Love Beach were decent tracks. I'll definitely be giving this one another listen in the future. Another record I added to my collection was A Private Heaven by Sheena Easton. I'm pretty sure it's obvious from the cover, but I'm holding some more obscure 80s pop yet again. The track Strut off this album was pretty popular and also features the track Sugar Walls, which was written by Prince under one of his various pseudonyms. A person I wasn't expecting to be on here to say the least. This is admittedly an album I haven't listened to too much since I've purchased it, but I will definitely have to go back to it. The next record is pretty worthless to me at the moment. It's Mountain's 1970 album Climbing. The only reason why I bought bought this album was because haha teehee Mississippi Queen, and it was only $1 due to how filthy it is. This isn't going near my record player anytime soon, and will mostly just serve as a paperweight. I've been listening to the album on Spotify, and it is some decent 70s rock. After looking through some of their discography, I am intrigued to listen to more. It's psychedelic album covers like these that really draw me in. Who knows, maybe I'll pick up a better copy someday and become a Mountain fan. Until then, they are known as the funny Mississippi Queen band. Further on, the next record I added to my collection was The Cars' Heartbeat City, a classic 80s new wave album that was produced by the infamous Mutt Lange. Sounds Like Magic, Drive, and You Might Think are notorious hits for the band. I'm very excited to add this one to my collection. The Cars' discography is one I've always wanted to dig deeper into, and this is definitely a good place to start. Moving on, the next record I added to my collection is once again Jim Steinman's Bad for Good. I swear to God I'm not hoarding these, I can explain. By the time this video comes out, my video about Jim Steinman would have already been released, so I shouldn't have to do too much to explain here. Bad for Good was originally released with a 7-inch single that featured The Storm and Rock and Roll Dreams Come Through on it. I have purchased this album twice previously, and neither copy came with the single until I stumbled across this album at a half-price Books of all places. I've mentioned this in other videos, but this is one of my favorite albums from Steinman, and owning 3 copies of the same album isn't that big of a deal. I might end up framing one of them, but nonetheless, I can finally scratch off that bonus 7-inch single off my bucket list. The next 2 albums I have to show are Sin After Sin and British Steel by Judas Priest. British Steel needs no introduction as it's one of the biggest metal albums of the 80s. Sin After Sin has many amazing songs on it as well, although a bit heavier in comparison to the radio-oriented British Steel. I've always talked about how I'm actively looking to include more metal albums in my collection. Metal on vinyl is typically so expensive, which makes it difficult to justify each purchase. Luckily I found both of these for under $20. British Steel was discounted a little bit because the track Metal God skips, but I'm not too worried about that. I wouldn't say I'm a Judas Priest superfan, but if the price is right, I'll definitely take the opportunity to add more to my collection. Moving on, I added one more metal album to my collection, and that is Quiet Riot's Mental Health. I don't know why, but as a kid, I always thought this album was called Mental Health for some reason. This album is notable for 80s hair metal hits, Metal Health, Bang Your Head, and their cover of Come On Feel the Noise. I really like adding hair metal albums like this to my collection because there's so many deep cuts that rarely get mentioned. The tracks Breathless and Run for Cover are pretty substantial on their own and definitely don't get as much attention as the other hits on the album. Next up, I added Laura Branigan's Self-Control to my collection. This album features many underrated 80s pop bangers and Branigan's amazing voice. This album features Self-Control, which is a big hit off the album, and other amazing songs such as Breaking Out and Take Me. I own this album on CD already, but of course I'm not going to pass on the opportunity to add the vinyl to my collection as well. This record is interesting because although it seems normal on the outside, the inner sleeve and lyric sheet feature Korean on them. I have no idea how a record from South Korea made its way to Ohio of all places, but it's an interesting and welcome addition to my collection nonetheless. As much as I love adding obscure 80s pop albums to my collection, I also love adding obscure prog albums to my collection as well. This is Citadel by Starcastle. This isn't the first Starcastle album I've added to my collection, and that is mainly because of how beautiful the artwork is. This particular copy is somewhat interesting because it was a promotional copy often given to radio stations. It even has recommended timestamps for the DJ to cut to. The idea of a Starcastle song being played on the radio is an entertaining idea to say the least. Overall, it's another decent album from Starcastle. It's really great if you love synths, but it's been admittedly a long time since I've listened to this one, so I can't comment too much about the tracks themselves. The next record I added to my collection was one I obtained through the many Record Store Day events last year. This is 333 by Green Jelly. I've talked about Green Jelly in my very first video on this channel where I picked up Triple Mother Goose live at Budokan. I love to make a more in-depth video about them at some point, but for those who don't know, Green Jelly is a comedy metal band that is known for its various puppets, costumes, theatric, and overall DIY mentality. This album is somewhat notorious because it features the song Carnage Rules, which is featured in the SNES and Genesis game Maximum Carnage. You know, that one that wasn't Doom that came in the red cartridge. Green Jelly is also known for making all their albums video albums and would essentially make a music video for each song on the album. I would love to get my hands on some of those old tapes someday, but for the time being, the records will suffice. Like the previous record, this was also another Record Store Day purchase. This is The Record by Fear, an influential punk record from 1982. Many artists such as Guns N' Roses and Nirvana have cited this album as one of their personal favorites. My knowledge of the album stems from Megadeth's Dystopia, where they covered foreign policy of all things. This Record Store Day release was pressed on this nice marble gray wax and includes a 7-inch single of their song Beep Christmas, if you know what I mean. If you don't, the uncensored version is there too. I'm really glad I added this one to my collection and have been able to educate myself a little bit more about the origins of punk. The next record I've added to my collection was MU, The Best of Jethro Tull. For those of you who don't know, I despise greatest hits albums and try my hardest to exclude them from my collection, but in cases like this, I've run out of Jethro Tull to collect. I'm only missing their 90s albums on vinyl, which cost more than a car payment to acquire, thus I'm left to collect the greatest hits albums they have. It also came with a poster, which is the right size to fill this gap in my wall. Maybe greatest hits albums aren't that bad after all. Recently I released a video talking about the Evangelion manga and its various spin-offs, and while writing that video, I managed to purchase this record, One Last Kiss by Hikaru Utada. This is a single that features some of the music from the Evangelion Rebuild movies and is clear, which is a nice bonus. Sadly, my copy is warped, but it still plays well. I really like the songs featured in the Rebuild movies, so it's a shame I can't play this as often as I'd like, but it's still a nice addition to my collection regardless. The next album I have here is a rather interesting one. This is Gamelan's self-titled album from 1987. This was one of those albums I picked up because of how beautiful the artwork on the front cover is. I'm serious, you can find some amazing albums this way. Anyways, going into this album completely blind, I'll be honest to say the last thing I was expecting was some instrumental rock-tinged jazz fusion tracks. It's a pretty solid album. I wish I had more to say about it, but I mostly listen to it while I'm editing in the background, and it kind of melds into ambient background noise. It's on Spotify if you'd like to check it out. Overall, it's an interesting addition to my collection, and I don't see myself forgetting about it anytime soon. Similar to Gamelan, this is another album I couldn't pass up due to its beautiful cover. This is Dolphin Smiles by Steve Kindler and Teha Bell. I was surprised at how much I like this album, honestly. This album is full of instrumental tracks that feature a wide range of instruments, and the acoustic guitars in particular are my favorite. The tracks are also soothing and relaxing. They definitely portray the peaceful seascape painted on the front cover. Another amazing album I will definitely have playing in the background while I edit. As of recording this video, it was just recently added to Spotify. Although the version they uploaded is a little compressed compared to other versions, it still sounds great nonetheless. This next album is just an anomaly. This is the album Eye of the Tiger by the band Tiger Tiger and was released in 1980. To be fair, this album was released 2 years before the Survivor song Eye of the Tiger, and because of that, it is near impossible to find any information of this band. There isn't even a rip of the album on YouTube. To my knowledge, based on Discogs, this is the only album they've ever released. It features a cover of Patti Smith's Because the Night and Rolling Stone's I Can't Get No Satisfaction, which I thought was interesting. Similar to Archangel that I mentioned earlier, it's more 80s radio-oriented rock. Time will tell if I eventually revisit this one, but hey, that album artwork is dope as hell. Moving on, I picked up Sheer Mag's third album, A Distant Call. Sheer Mag is one of my favorite recent bands, and I'm really overjoyed to add their latest album to my collection. Sheer Mag has always had this DIY grunge 70s sound to them. Their Spotify bio lists them as a mix between Jackson 5 and MC5, which I think is a fitting comparison. This album sees them taking a subtle arena rock direction, which I thought was very interesting. For some reason, I always forget about this album when thinking about the band and haven't listened to it as much as their previous material. Hopefully adding this to my collection will remind me to give it more spins. This next record has been on my wishlist for the longest time. It's Vanity Six's self-titled album. I've mentioned in previous record hauls that I'm a massive Prince fan. I also find many of his side bands he indulged in are very underappreciated and very interesting. Vanity Six is no different. This is the only album released by the band before they would meld into Apollonia 6. This album is full of catchy pop songs and the type of raunchy songwriting Prince was known for at the time. He's So Dull is one of my personal favorites off this album, but be warned when you listen to it once, you won't get it out of your head. The sides of the album are also labeled Side 1 and Side 6, which I thought was a cute touch. And those are all the records I picked up over the last couple of months. I haven't fallen out of record collecting, but with school and work I have to be somewhat responsible and disperse my income responsibly. However, that still won't stop me from picking up a few more albums along the way. I hope you guys enjoyed this video and thought what I've added to my collection to be interesting. I'd love to hear what you guys added to your collection in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching and have a nice day.